Chapter 20. The force of the explosion pushed Jess underneath the shuttle, lucky for him. As it was, Lara had to slap out a patch of burning fabric on his leg before dragging him away from the growing fire. She wasn't sure what had happened. She'd heard Ellis shout, and then there was the explosion, the shuttle rocking violently. She'd run out and seen Ellis frantically pulling the hose away from the ship, huge sections of the deck covered with burning fuel. She'd seen a flailing shape engulfed in flames only a few meters away, and for one terrible second, she'd been sure that it was Jess. If she hadn't heard him groaning from beneath the transport. Ellis joined them behind the shuttle, helping Lara pull Jess to the far railing, but Lara knew that they wouldn't be safe if the tanks caught fire. Jess started to come out of his daze, looking up into Ellis's stricken face as he rubbed at his jaw, obviously in pain. "Ever heard of overkill, kid?" he asked. Lara laughed weakly. Jess was okay, that was the important thing, but the realization that they weren't going to be flying anywhere was sinking in, making her feel very, very tired. God, is this ever going to end? "What happened?" Lara asked. "I think I killed us," Ellis said, so softly that Lara barely heard it. "There was this thing. It attacked Jess." He trailed off miserably, the dancing light of the developing fire on his face making him look incredibly old. Lara put the rest together quickly enough. He'd sprayed the assailant with fuel and somehow, something had caught fire. "It was invisible," Jess said, using the rail to drag himself to his feet. "Some kind of electrical device. Got shorted out and boom." Lara couldn't find it in herself to be surprised. A personal cloaking mechanism? Sure, why not? It was no stranger than that corporate mass murder, no more improbable than being fished out by the abyss on a dead shuttle in the first place. There was a soft humming overhead, and they all looked up to see a small ship go streaking across the dark, close enough for them to see the Weyland-Yutani logo. Lara thought she'd heard other ships earlier. And what are the chances that there's still anyone left willing to give us a lift? Or anyone at all? If there were people around, they sure weren't interested in putting out the fire that was currently consuming one of their landing decks. "Briggs?" Jess asked, still watching as the ship shot away from the station. Lara nodded. Probably. She didn't say what she was thinking, what Jess and Ellis surely already knew. If a high suit like Briggs, who'd wanted them so much that he'd come to Bunda himself, was giving it up, then things here are bad. Really fucking bad. Maybe the thing that had attacked Jess had been busy with the researchers before. That might explain the ceaseless alarm anyway. Or maybe it was just the fact that the station's platforms had continued their slow tilt, at least 15 degrees now. If they slanted much farther, there wouldn't be a stable deck to take off from. "We gotta get out of here before the shuttle catches," Jess said, although he didn't look well enough to do much more than stand upright. And Ellis looked like he was on the verge of some emotional collapse, his entire body trembling, his eyes wide and shining with unshed tears. "I'm so sorry," he said, taking a step away from them, his hands clenched into fists. "This is all my fault." "Hey, I might have done the same thing," Lara said. "Or Jess. You don't understand," he said, his voice rising. "I've done everything wrong since we got here, everything." Instinctively, Lara took a step toward him, reaching out. And there was a sound so deep, so powerful, that they felt it as much as heard it. Woof! An explosion of brilliant light, a massive wave of pressure that threw all of them against the waist-high railing. The deck beneath them slanted past 45 degrees, all of them falling, landing and skidding. "Hang on!" Jess shouted, but there was nothing to hang on to. The deck was lit up like day, and Lara rolled over, trying desperately to find a handhold on a slick platform. She saw the shuttle, burning, crashing across the deck and blowing right through the railing, a giant tearing metal sound as it plunged over the side. She saw Ellis and Jess scrabbling to hang on, saw both of them slide beneath the high rail, disappearing after the shuttle. And she saw the burning envelope, an incredible fireball of ignited gas, the flame eating the pliable shell like acid through paper. It was the last thing she saw as she slipped over the side, falling through the shadow of the crashing station. Within moments of her release, the alien queen had enacted revenge on at least a handful of her captors. 9, to be exact. The only hunters left on board. Noguchi was too busy flying the shell to watch all of it, but she saw enough. The queen had somehow known where the Yautja were gathered, and made her way unerringly to the dock outside of the pilot's room. How she'd negotiated the lifts and tunnels, Noguchi didn't know, or care. The ship hadn't broken through Bunda's atmosphere when Noguchi heard the queen shriek, a furious and somehow gleeful cry, echoing through the hollow dock. It pierced the clattering shouts of the Yautja trying to break into the control room. The sounds of metal banging against the door were cut off in a heartbeat. She heard the hunters cry warnings to one another, heard and felt the queen's thundering approach, and felt a kind of perverse satisfaction at the thought of what would happen next. They won't use burners, not on a queen, not without Top-Knot's leave, and all of them experienced veterans. Noguchi couldn't deny the curiosity she felt, wondering how they'd fare against the loosed queen. She finished with her programming, directing the shell to home in on the signal from Top-Knot's craft, and hurried to the hatch's window. The battle was already in progress. 3 hunters down, dying or dead. 6 were left, and they'd circled the raging queen with makeshift weapons, mallets, pry bars, a kind of pickaxe with one sharpened end. 2 of them were holding lengths of braided rope, and none wore armour of any kind. Stupid and arrogant. Any sympathy Noguchi might have felt for them then was pretty much wiped out by the simple fact that they were still there. Instead of leaving, locking the queen inside and waiting for reinforcements to return, or just killing her outright for that matter, they meant to capture her again, without even bothering to arm themselves properly. The queen, crouched in their midst, was swinging her head slowly back and forth, tilting it as if to mark their positions. Her tail curled restlessly about her giant clawed feet, its razor tip leaving long scratches on the deck's floor, occasionally slapping against one of the dead Yautja nearby. He'd been clawed open, his chest a muddled soup of bone and green, and the queen's tail whipped streams of his blood across the legs of some of those circling her. Noguchi saw one of the hunters behind the watchful bug. Beads signalled to another, one of the rope holders. He was going to attack, and wanted both of the rope holders to move in while the queen was distracted. Noguchi watched as the signal went around the circle, each of the hunters picking it up. And as if she understood that they were distracted by their own foolish planning, the queen lunged forward, her tail coiling up behind her. She snatched at the nearest hunter with both sets of ebony claws on her right side, her talons sliding into his chest before he could raise his pry bar. At the same time, her tail slashed out, knocking Beads and the other 2 to the deck. The sharp tip cut through tendon and bone, crippling Beads and the hunter to his left. One of Beads' feet was completely sliced off, toppling over into the gush of pale liquid that spurted from his ankle. In a single move, she'd halved the group. With a feral scream, she flung the limp hunter hanging from her right hands away, his body smashing into one wall hard enough for Noguchi to hear the bones snapping, even through the door. A hunter she'd called Inu seized the opportunity, leaping forward with his pick, burying the sharp end in the top of the screeching queen's left thigh. Even as a trickle of her blood started its bubbling erosion on the metal, Inu was lifted off his feet and held up in front of her grinning, drooling face. Her inner jaws shot out, tearing into Inu's forehead, snapping closed and withdrawing in the blink of an eye. The hunter's limbs were still spasming when she threw him aside. And the shell pitched forward suddenly, knocking the 2 Yautja still standing to the floor, causing the queen to stumble. Noguchi grabbed at the door's handle, managing to keep upright. She turned, saw that the shell was tunneling through Bunda's outer atmosphere, flashes of light and dark painting the view screen with violent, burning motion. Another trumpeting howl from the Queen. Noguchi turned back to the window just in time to see the bug mother put an end to the ill-planned assault. A step forward, a swift blow delivered, a lash of her tail, and it was over. The deck was awash with green, broken bodies toppled together, unmoving. If the two crippled hunters were still alive, Noguchi couldn't tell. And the Queen. Noguchi took a step back from the door as her long midnight face filled the window, as she seemed to look into the control room, to look directly at her. Her black comb sweeping up and out of sight, her grinning blindness tilted to smell or taste or hear the woman inside. Noguchi studied her, filled with awe, afraid to breathe. She was a glorious, terrible creature. She was Death, the black warrior that the hunter spoke of before battle. For a frozen moment, they faced each other, a hand-width of clear plastic separating them. And then the monstrous Queen turned and moved away, a dark grace in her fluid, powerful movements. Noguchi watched her disappear from the bloody dock, feeling as though she'd been spared, not knowing why. Behind her, the console gurgled out a few Yautja words, telling her that the manual assistance was required to set exact coordinates. Noguchi turned and moved back to the controls, surprised to see the night sky of Bunda flashing by on the large view screen. It had taken less time than she'd thought. Still dazed from her closeness to the alien Queen, it took her a moment to see the bright spot on the monitor, a yellow-white flower in the dark jumble of the planet's surface, as big or bigger than the shell. What? An explosion, and a big one. Noguchi checked the monitor for top-notch ship signal, and although she couldn't be sure she was reading it right, it appeared that he wasn't more than a few clicks from the fireball. In any case, it was obvious where the action on Bunda was centered. Noguchi tapped at the controls, shifting the ship towards the light, hoping she wasn't too late. Kevin Vincent woke up, hurting and alone, the bright heat from the burning station illuminating the crash of bushes he'd landed in. He tried to move, to sit up, but felt a sharp, stabbing pain across his back, centering on his left shoulder. He was able to turn his head, at least, enough to see the mass of flaming wreckage that had been Bunda Survey. It seemed to stretch forever. Clicks of smashed deck, clicks of burning, stinking envelope draped across the mountains of debris. Shit, he whispered miserably, feeling terrible in every way possible. His station had been attacked, his people murdered for information about some abominable experiment, and those who'd survived had fled, leaving him to die. Briggs was probably dead. No real comfort since he'd been held responsible. He seemed to have broken his shoulder. And I'm lying in a goddamn bush, and it's poking through my goddamn shirt, and it hurts. And why doesn't someone just put me out of my goddamn misery? If he didn't move, the pain wasn't too bad. Vincent closed his eyes for a moment, sweat rolling off of his flushed skin, wondering what could possibly happen next. That he'd survived was a small miracle, not because of the fall. The station had gone down slowly enough for the fall to be survivable, but that the gods hadn't killed him already, just on general principle. Because that would have been too easy. Gotta let me live so I can understand how much they hate me. Let me suffer a little more. No fun if I don't suffer. The crackle and hiss of the giant, shallow fire was loud enough to occupy his hearing until the crack of a thin branch not 2 meters away reached him. He instinctively tried to sit up, and was instantly knocked back down by the pain. Ow! No, don't want to die, please! Vincent babbled out a stream of denial and wishes, eyes quenched shut, knowing that whatever was coming wasn't coming to help. He was right. The thing that stood over him when he opened his eyes was the thing from the station. The synth that had been fighting Briggs's bodyguard, except it wasn't wearing its mask. And Vincent realized, with a kind of numb horror, that it wasn't a synthetic at all. He was struck speechless, his pleas dying in his throat, barely able to believe what he was seeing. The creature that stared down at him was the ugliest, most alien-looking thing he'd ever seen. A giant, bony head, speckled and fleshy, 4 finger-like pincers on its beady-eyed, pink-mouthed, noseless face, each tipped with a gleaming tusk. "What are you?" Vincent whispered, and the creature's pincers opened outward, fully exposing the small, pointed teeth in its strange mouth. The creature reached for something on its arm, holding its clawed hand up as it touched some kind of bracelet. And Vincent heard his own voice spill out, "No, don't want to die, please." And the creature flexed its arm, and 2 extremely sharp and nasty-looking blades sprang out from behind its hand, curved and shining in the firelight. And Vincent closed his eyes, thinking that it was a bad dream, some hallucination. He wouldn't